Hey, welcome to Let's Unravel, and I'm your friend Christina. So, hot take, do onions belong on salads? Let me know your thoughts in the comment below, and I'll let you know my thoughts at the end of this episode. Thanks for stopping by. Whether you're a friend of the podcast or a new listener, I just wanted to say welcome. So, we have some new and exciting things coming to Let's Unravel. I'm talking new guests, I'm talking new topics, and so much more. And you are not going to want to miss a thing. So, make sure you're pressing that subscribe button, that follow button, anywhere you might listen, from YouTube to Spotify to Apple Podcast. Now, if you want to see short clips of the show and see all new announcements, you are going to want to make sure that you are following us on Instagram and TikTok at Let's Unravel Pod, because after all, you're not going to want to miss a thing. So let's move into our favorite topic here at Let's Unravel. Win of the week. So the win this week is, I wanted to give a big shout out to my dad. He has officially retired, and now it's just exciting to see that he gets to enter into this whole new phase of life of retirement. Happy retirement, Dad. Congratulations. You did it. Now, without any further ado, let's move into our topic of the week. What are we unraveling today? Let's unravel building credibility. Now, we have talked about so many things here at Let's Unravel. We've talked about dreams. We've talked about expectations. We've talked about the foundations of your 20s. And now today, we are going to talk about building credibility. And I think credibility is one of the most important things to focus on in your 20s, especially if you're trying to build a career. Credibility is the secret sauce to success. Having worked in a variety of places, and specifically working in a startup and also working in corporate, I have been around a variety of successful people. And if there's one thing I've noticed among all these successful people is they have credibility. And so in order for us to build credibility, I think we first have to know what credibility is. So of course, I'm going to give you a definition of a word. So credibility, it's the quality of being trusted and believed in. In a lot of ways, I think you can even say AKA, it's your reputation. And one of the most important things in life is your reputation, because when you leave a room, when people talk about you when you're no longer in that room, that's your credibility. That's your reputation. Your credibility, your reputation, that is something that will far outlive who you are. It will also enter rooms prior to you even getting there. So I've said credibility is the secret sauce to success. Now, to build credibility, and now that we've defined what credibility is, and basically credibility is trust. It's an endorsement. An endorsement is just someone backing up really who you are. So, I always think about it in terms of a presidential election where you'll always hear someone say, I endorse this candidate, meaning they stand behind them, they back them. So with credibility being the secret sauce to success, I am going to give you my 2 best practices that I've used to build credibility in this episode. There's a couple things that we're going to want to look at. So like I said, it's trust, it's an endorsement, it's your reputation, but a big component about also establishing credibility, or really the results of credibility, is a strong network. So let's set the scene here. Let's say you're in your early to mid 20s. You're anywhere from 22 to 25, or you could have been like me. I was closer to 25, almost 26 when I was working in a startup. But let's talk about building a network. Your network will slowly start with the people that you work around you. It could be people you went to school with. It could be people in a variety of different walks of life. But the people that you're going to most likely make the biggest impression on are usually the people you work with. And the reason why this is because think about it, you're spending 40 plus hours a week working with these individuals. So you want to make sure you're making a lasting impression on those individuals, whether it's your peers or whether it's your manager. You want to make that lasting impression. Now, building a network is vastly different based on each person. And the reason why it's vastly different is because we have 2 different types of people. We have introverts and we have extroverts. Now, I'm going to reveal a little secret here. I'm a big time introvert. All of my friends know just how introverted I am. I mean, I am someone that I'll make plans to hang out with somebody, but if the plans get canceled, I'm instantly 1,000 times happier. I am someone that I will go out for a social gathering and I won't need another social gathering for a month. I am a true introvert. And naturally, I've fallen into every extroverted job I could possibly find. So if you're someone that's been an introvert, maybe your favorite thing is not to talk about yourself, I got some tips for you. Now, if you happen to be an extrovert, I am so sorry. I have no tips for you. Honestly, I think extroverts are great. Half of the friends I've had have all been extroverts, and it's you guys have such an amazing gift of just being able to give so much energy to people. I think it's great. But for all you introverts, I want to give you some hope. So naturally in the workplace, we praise extroverts because it's all about going out. It's all about making connections and just a variety of these things. But introverts, you have a unique superpower that extroverts don't necessarily have. Now, because introverts, you don't like to go out, your favorite thing is not to just talk to people randomly or have small talk or whatever the case may be, even though there are some extroverts that don't like small talk either. But for introverts, one of the unique things about introverts is you tend to establish deeper connections because you're not interested in shallow conversations. Maybe you're a little bit more introspective, or you're just a little more intentional with your conversations. This is still great for building a network. So one of the things I've always lived by is I always like to let my actions lead. And this goes to credibility. This is not one of the practices, but one of the ways to build credibility is let your actions speak for you. So be a hard worker. Make sure that if you say you're going to be somewhere, you're there on time, if not early. One of the things my brother-in-law used to say to me, he goes, if you're 15 minutes early, you're on time. If you're on time, you're late. And if you're 15 minutes late, don't bother to show up. And that was one of those mottos he used to tell me as I was getting older and I was entering into the workforce. And it was something that really put everything into perspective, where it's about your reputation. So if you say you're going to do something, make sure you do that thing. Another valuable piece of advice, this is the advice I've actually given to people on my team before. When I was a manager, I remember there was one individual, they weren't necessarily hitting their targets with deliverables, where they would say they were going to deliver this project, they were going to deliver this report, and they weren't quite making it. And so I sat down with this person and I said, I'm going to give you the best piece of advice you're ever going to get. And they're like, okay. And I said, have you ever heard of the phrase under promise and over deliver? And in a lot of ways, it feels like you're lying. You're not, though. The idea is, in the event that you happen to underestimate how long something's going to take you, if you under promise. So let's say you know that a certain report is going to take you 8 hours to do. And say someone asks you in the very beginning of your day, and they say, hey, we are going to need this particular report. When do you think you can have it? And say you say by the end of the day. But that basically only really gives you a tight timeline of maybe 8 hours. Now, what you want to do is you want to under promise and over deliver. So if you say, I can have that to you within 48 hours, basically what you're just doing is you're providing yourself with more time than just stating by end of day. And then what happens is if you have the report done by end of day, you can send it and then you instantly look like you overperformed. So this is a little tip and a trick. And the thing is, honestly, one thing I've learned with being in corporate and even working with people in all different kinds of customer service areas, it's always better to under promise and over deliver. It's just the way it works out, especially if you run into issues. There's nothing worse than, like, I think about the pizza companies. I don't remember which company it was, but it used to be call your order in, we'll deliver it to you all within under an hour. And if we're over an hour, the pizza's free. That was a crazy promotional period this pizza company was running. I'm sorry, I don't remember which pizza company it was, but that is a crazy promise. But if you know you can fulfill that promise, by all means. But then if you fail that promise, are you ready to pay the price of whatever the product is? So in that instance, it was giving a free pizza away. Or I always think about Dairy Queen, how they would have the Frosties and they would flip them. And if the ice cream fell out, then you would have gotten your ice cream free. But once again, if you notice with Dairy Queen, they perfected it. So every time they flipped it, it didn't fall out. Or my favorite is, I think the Dairy Queen I go to, they have a sign that says, we don't do the flip anymore. And I think that is absolutely hysterical. So whatever you promise people, make sure you can deliver it. And by using this tip of under promise, over deliver, this is an idea where you start to build a repertoire, credibility, reputation. You're starting to establish a pattern with people. And this is crucial with your network. Everybody wants someone that they can trust. Everybody wants someone they can rely on. Why? Because trust, endorsement, credibility. And as you're entering into a new job, a new career, or honestly, any phase of life, one of the most important things you want to do while you're starting to establish a network is you want to lead with value. So a perfect example is, say you have absolutely nothing to offer. So you're fresh out of school. Maybe you're someone like me. I had only worked in retail, had no corporate experience. How do you lead with value? Well, there is one value and there is one currency that we all have, and that is time. Now, time is irreplaceable, and that is something everyone at some point comes to terms with. So with you being young, you have time. That is a currency that everybody wants. But what you also have in your early 20s is you have a lot of energy. You think about a lot of these managers in these roles, they're maybe in their late 20s, their 30s, their 40s, their 50s. They're more senior roles. And a lot of them have families or they have stressful jobs. And so what's one of those things that slowly drains over time? Their energy. So here is a perfect example. Lead with value. So time, what is something that you can do? If you are able to help someone, so if let's say you want to learn a new skill. So you find someone with a skill that you want to learn. Maybe you want to learn Excel better, and you find someone in your office that's really good at Excel. And this is where you can start to lead with value. So you could say something like, hey, would you mind if we trade skills? Where it could be something, maybe you're really good with English, grammatically, whatever the case may be, and you decide to switch skills where they are going to give you 15, 30 minutes a day where they're going to teach you all kinds of stuff with Excel. But what you're going to do is something that takes them maybe about an hour or something that's kind of tedious, but they can hand off to you. You're going to lead with value and you're going to say, I'm going to take that off your plate for you. And you don't have to worry about it. Now, what is happening is twofold. One, you start to look like you're a team player, which you are. And two, the next thing that's happening is you're learning a new skill, which is Excel, and you're learning another new skill, which is whatever the item is the person has handed off to you. And then by the end of it, based on how well of a job you are executing whatever the project is that person gave to you, you are now starting to build a network. And people are starting to see if they can trust you. And so you might be asking me, this doesn't really make sense. I don't know how to really apply this to my life. I promise you, there are people in organizations that want to teach and train. There are people within organizations that want to answer questions. Sometimes you have to first make the first move, but you always have to lead with value. People want to pour into other people, but at the end of the day, when you're in a tight time frame and you have a lot of things that you need to turn over, you also need to provide that person with value because it also has to go back to deliverables, under promise, overperform. Now, before I give you my secret sauce on how to build credibility, there's one last thing I want to make you aware of, is in this whole idea of building a network, I want you to value two words. The first word is yes, and the second word is no. You need to so understand the weight of both of those words. Saying yes to something is incredibly important, just like saying no is incredibly important too. I remember at different points in my life when I decided to tackle certain projects. So when I was working at a startup or when I was writing my first novel, I remember a writing mentor had said, you have to value saying yes to things and you have to value saying no to things. When I was in the process of writing my rough draft for my first novel, my writing mentor had said, in this season, you are saying yes to writing a rough draft. And then she had said, and you're also saying no to anything that distracts you from that rough draft. So now I've thrown you all these different ideas on building network, the importance of a network, how to establish a network. And so now it is time we get to the secret sauce of this whole episode, the two practices that has propelled my ability to build credibility. So these two practices, I can easily summarize them into a phrase. So the first practice is never say no. And I'm going to give you a little caveat. It's not actually about saying no, but the phrase is never say no. It's not actually about saying no. So the second phrase is pass the buck. Now, if you're anything like me, the first thing I would be saying is those are the weirdest phrases I've ever heard. What does any of that have to do with building credibility? Well, I'm glad you asked. So let's start with never say no. Never say no has nothing to do with actually saying no. Actually, never say no. So I had learned both never say no and pass the buck when I was working in retail. The company that I had worked for, they had two mottos, and it was both of these mottos, never say no and pass the buck. And never say no, like I said, has nothing to do with saying no. What they were trying to instill in all of the workers was you never wanted to look at a customer and say, no, we don't have that. What they were promoting was they would say, you need to provide a solution. So a lot of times the solution was come order from our online store, which you would also get yelled at because you were supposed to walk them over to a computer and then pull the item up and say, look, I can simply order it for you. And so the idea was to not only provide a solution, but make it feel seamless, make it feel effortless because you had walked them over to the computer. Let's look, let's find out. And really all Never Say No was always about finding a solution. Now, most people would be like, well, that's just a silly phrase you learned in retail. Well, this phrase actually propelled my entire career, both within a startup, corporate, you name it, because this process was so ingrained to me that anytime I came across a problem, whether it was a problem within an organization, whether it was a product problem, the point was I had to somehow have a solution to fix what was going on. A perfect example of this phrase put into action is I was working within a startup and I had a manager of another department reaching out to me because I had been really familiar with this program. And they're like, hey, I'm trying to pull all these numbers for some of the team members that were going out and selling products. And they were like, we need to see certain information. And so they would say something like, we want to see the breakdown based on like Office or something like that. And because we were in a startup and everything is so new, we a lot of times didn't always have certain reporting capabilities. So they'd say, oh, we want to see all of this by Office. And I would look in the system and I'd say, okay, that's not possible. And their first reaction is, okay, it can't be done. And I go, no. What is it that you actually need? I know you're trying to break this down by Office, but what is the actual goal that we're trying to go for? And so then this manager had ended up saying, oh, well, actually, I really wanted to know how many accounts had come through based on each individual representative within those offices. As soon as they said that, I was like, oh, I can easily pull this report based off representative. They just don't break it into offices. And they were like, oh, okay. So then that's when I was able to pull a whole Excel spreadsheet. I had everything all nicely organized. And in that moment, the manager goes, wow, you saved me and so a lot of work because I found a solution. That's where this never say no really comes into play because it's about finding a solution. There's a solution for a lot of things. Now, in this instance, the way I was able to get beyond the never saying no, so yes, technically I had said, oh no, we can't pull based off offices, but what I was doing is I needed to determine the need because the want was the office. The need was actually trying to find it based on a representative. And so because of having practiced that phrase so many times, it was something where I was easily able to get from point A to point B. Now, for you, as you're starting to implement this practice into your everyday life, your instinct is going to be no. And I'm going to tell you right now, the first few solutions you come up with, they're going to suck. It's part of life. But don't be scared. Don't get nervous. Just roll with the punches. As you start to practice idea of never saying no, it's a muscle. It gets stronger over time. And so at first it's a little weak. It doesn't necessarily work, but over time it starts to really get easier because once you can start to say, what's the need? I can't provide the want, but I can provide the need. One of the best things about never say no is you slowly can start to figure out the principles or the means in which people operate from. So a perfect example is when I was talking about in the previous story about a manager from another department coming and talking to me because they were looking for like sale reports and just different things like that. And maybe we didn't necessarily have the first report that she wanted based off Office. As I started to notice, oh, this looks like it's going to be a reoccurring report she's most likely going to want. One of the things I would start to do to further solve this solution is I would talk to IT. And I'd say, hey, we need to create a report where we're able to break everything down based off offices. And this is an instance, once again, where you're building credibility. Because once that solution is made permanent, then what happens is once you go and talk to that manager again, so in this example, it's like, oh, when I talked to Christina, not only did she solve my problem in the moment, so even though my solution didn't necessarily come to fruition in the way I wanted it, but Christina solved the problem in a way that I needed, then what she's done is she's further solved the problem by going one step further. And so this is where not only are you just simply building trust, you're building that credibility, you're building that reputation, you're building that when I bring this to this individual, when I bring this to Christina, when I bring this to you, the listener, that you're able to solve a problem, that you're able to move the needle forward, people will want to reach out to you. And that's what you want. You want people to want to work with you. You want people to think highly of you. This is how you build a strong network because there's going to be a day when you're going to need that network to help further you in a certain direction. So now moving into my second practice, pass the buck. Now, pass the buck, I remember the first time I heard this, I was like, this is the weirdest thing I've ever heard. Now, if you've ever heard of pass the buck, please drop a comment down below because I had never heard of this phrase before. Basically, pass the buck means it's a phrase that's you shift the responsibility for something to someone else. That is entirely what pass the buck means. You're just moving responsibility from one person to another person. Now, I'm going to give you a little caveat. This practice is not about passing off work to someone else. It's about passing the responsibility, meaning you don't have the knowledge of how to solve this problem. So never say no is you have the knowledge or the bandwidth to solve a problem. But pass the buck means you don't have the knowledge. So it's your first day on the job. Perfect example is when I was a trainer and someone doesn't know how to, if it was in a retail store, they didn't know how to cash somebody out. If it was at a startup, they didn't know how to use the program. There would be a moment in time where they would need to pass the buck to me so then I could either teach them or I can assist them through the process. And so with pass the buck, I want you to think of it as tag teaming, because what you're going to do is you're learning the method of how to provide a solution in a certain circumstance. And so the idea is at whatever job that you have, you're either going to have a trainer, a manager, you're going to have somebody that you report into, and they're going to be the person that you ask your questions to. And so the idea is, once again, you want to practice that idea of never saying no. So you come up with a solution. So say you run into an issue, you don't know how to solve it. When I'm talking about an issue, I'm talking about something within your bandwidth that you can fix. I'm not talking about a lack of knowledge. Let's say you run into an issue. And one of the things you can do is you can brainstorm, okay, how are we going to fix this? So then when you get to your manager, you could say, hey, this report's not printing for some reason. And this is where you're going to do the never say no ideas, where it's like, I shut off my computer, it doesn't work. I rebooted this, it didn't work. And you're kind of giving the synopsis that you didn't run into an issue and run to them. You want to make sure that you are establishing a firm foundation, that you have done everything you possibly could before you reached out. Because it's this idea that as a manager knows, oh, when this person comes to me and they say this isn't working, it's genuinely not working. It's not because they missed the button. It's not because they forgot to start their computer. It's really you actually need help. And then what's also great is if you're able to look at something and you're like, I'm having a feeling. So like a perfect example is when I was working at a startup, we used to have problems with our programs all the time. So when I would call IT and I'd say, hey, this isn't working, and I'm almost positive it has to do with, and I would list the reason why. And 9 out of 10 times when that would happen, IT would look into it and they're like, oh no, you were right. It was exactly this issue. And when you can start to identify where a pressure point is to something and you can provide some type of context or some type of solution. So even in that instance, when I said, hey, when I do this function and this function, I'm thinking this is why it's not working. I didn't solve the problem because I don't have an IT background. But what I've done is I've narrowed it down. Because could you imagine if I called up IT and I was like, yeah, the program's not working? They'd be like, okay, well, there's like 20 questions I need to ask you to narrow down what this very specific window is, and this is why it's not working. When instead, when I go to them and I say, hey, when I press this button and this button, it doesn't work. Just remember, being direct, being clear, this is a great phrase my family uses all the time. Clear is kind. So be direct. Don't be like harsh direct. Just be clearly direct, meaning, hey, when I press this button and this button, it doesn't work. Clear is kind. One of the most important things that you need to remember in this idea of pass the buck. Now, when I had learned this phrase in retail, all of the managers knew pass the buck was a mantra that we stood by. So when we ran into an issue, the managers expected for you to stay with the manager through the whole problem or conversation, because the idea was to teach you what the outcome would look like. So if you came across it again, you knew how to deal with it. So obviously something to be aware of is maybe that's not the culture of the company that you're in. So completely understandable. But one of the things you can do, once again, going back to this idea, network, knowing the people that you work around, identify who the teammates are that you have. Identify the type of manager that you have. There's so many different types of managers, but there's some managers that they don't want to be bothered, that they really just want a solution, or if you bring them a problem, they're going to quickly kind of just be like, okay, you're fine, go away now. And what you can do with pass the buck, one of two things, and once again, this also goes back to how your manager responds. If you have the type of manager that's like, okay, well, you brought me a problem. But you could always follow up with a manager one of two ways. You could say, oh, do you mind if I stick with you so I could see what the outcome looks like? And a lot of times, like even when I've had managers that are like, oh, I'll just handle this by myself. If I say, hey, do you mind if I stick with you so I can see what the outcome of this looks like? They're like, oh yeah, sure, absolutely. And you can even express, oh, I would just like to know what the resolve is. So when this happens next time, I know how to resolve it myself. And it's like, oh, great, I love that. Or you can have some managers where you might have some managers that don't want you involved whatsoever. And then you have to respect that and you walk away. You make a note of that for next time and maybe pass the buck, and staying with them isn't going to work for that manager. And sometimes you'll have peers on your team that are able to solve problems or answer questions maybe better than like a manager is, just because they're teachers or they're a better trainer or whatever the case is. So maybe it's one of those things you utilize a peer where you can ask questions and come up with these ideas. So then when you go to bring it to a manager, you're good to go. Now, if you want to establish a great, strong network, you have to give praise where praise is due. You cannot take credit for someone else's work. That is the quickest way to lower your credit score, let's just say. Yeah, totally made a joke about a credit score. But I will say, if you can honor the people around you, you can give them compliments, you can give them praise. I'm not talking about being a brown noser, and I'm not talking about kissing butt. I am talking about you are able to actually look at the people around you that as you solve a problem, if you didn't actually come up with the solution, you should therefore be giving credit to the person that did come up with the solution. That is how this whole networking thing works really well. Any person that tries to take credit for someone else, at some point in time, it will bite them in the butt, and you will find out that it in fact was not them that solved this problem. It was someone else. So I strongly advise you, if you want to have a network and if you take credit for someone else's work, it will spread like wildfire. That wasn't actually your work. It was someone else's. And slowly over time, you'll start to notice people may not want to work with you, or they may not consider you part of their network. And so another benefit with this idea of passing the buck is once you are able to establish that you can come up with solutions, that you can be involved in these conversations, don't be surprised if people start reaching out to you for your input, because they really need like a sounding board. That was something I had learned at being at a startup, is because I was always able to bring some type of solution somewhere, I started to have different managers reach out to me, and all of a sudden we'd start having these brainstorming sessions because I was able to listen to what they were saying. We'd have moments of understanding what's the want, what's the need, what's the time frame. And this was something where we were able to project on what do we think is possible versus what is something that we want to plan for long term. And so now we've talked about credibility. I've given you my secret sauce and tips on how to build credibility in your life. But one of the ways I've seen this play out a lot is in TV shows and different contexts like that. And so I think about the TV show Castle and how it's about this writer. He's working with a New York detective. And so the lead character's name is Castle. The detective in the show is Kate Beckett. And because Castle was a mystery novelist, and because Kate Beckett was actually a detective, she didn't always necessarily believe some of the things he would say. Because you're like, you're just a fiction writer. Like, what do you actually know about solving a murder? That type of thing. But what happened is, as you see the progression of the show, he slowly starts to build credibility with her. He slowly starts to build a rapport with her, that it gets to this point where she actually trusts him. And it's like, okay, you're funny and goofy, but like, I actually trust what you're saying because we're able to solve these mysteries together. And so that's where a lot of times in TV shows, you can see where this person has built credibility with another character. You know, I think about the show Abbott Elementary, and I think about one of the main characters, Janine Teagues. And I think it's so cool with her character, how in the show, in the first season, it's like she's a newish teacher. And it's one of those things like, oh, she's so naive. Kind of just that thing, like she's young, she's naive, she has all these hopes and these ambitions. So nobody kind of gives her credibility because it's kind of like, well, you're new to this. Like, teaching hasn't worn you down yet. But then what's so interesting is over the course of the several seasons, and you start to notice that she builds credibility with the teachers around her, because as she faces the different trials or as she faces different hardships, all of a sudden it's like, oh, she's still happy. Okay, like she has credibility because they've seen her go through some tricky situations. And again, I love to talk about Marvel, but I just think about Spider-Man and Tony Stark and how even in one of the Spider-Man movies, when he has gotten this really cool suit from Tony Stark and Peter Parker is like, this is the best, all this stuff. And then all of a sudden Tony Stark's like, you're undeserving of it. I'm taking it away. Because it was this idea of where it's like, Peter had credibility. He lost the credibility. And then he goes and he fights the monster, the bad guy. And all of a sudden he builds back his credibility. You see this progression throughout a variety of movies and TV shows where a lot of times it's this young kid, they're trying to build credibility. And once again, it goes back to these different ideas that we've talked about under promise, over deliver, about coming up with solutions. It's about standing by your word and all these different ideas. So those were just some of my favorite ways of getting to really see credibility played out in really this TV world, these movies. You know, it's funny, in these Marvel movies, I feel like they have so many great life lessons to them. So with this whole idea of credibility and how to establish, how to build credibility, it's about doing what you say you're going to do and providing follow through. And even just a few minor practices that can also help with establishing credibility. It could be when you say you're going to do something, providing the follow through of doing those said things. Clear is kind. So whenever you're addressing something, being clear, it's the kindest thing you can do. It could be looking like completing or solving a problem. It could be being organized. That sounds crazy, but being organized, it really helps with building your credibility among people. Another great one that I think people should practice more is being slow to speak, but quick to listen. So many people think dominance has to do with how loud they can talk in a room or just the fact they can talk in a room, when really credibility, dominance, it's listening. Because you know what's so cool is when you sit in a room and you see the person that doesn't talk a lot, all of a sudden they start to talk, people start to lean in because they want to listen to what you're saying. So if you can build this idea of letting your actions speak for you, and then you do this being slow to speak, but quick to listen, then as it gets to be your turn to speak, you'll be amazed at how people actually respect, they lean in, they make more space for you to be heard. Now, this might not be the case in all environments. You know, there's some environments where it's really toxic, and no matter how hard you try, you can't fix a toxic environment. But if you're in a healthy organization, you're in a healthy room with individuals, these practices can actually help you and catapult you into the roles that you want to have or the career that you want to have ultimately. So I want to leave you with two ideas. The first idea is your credibility. It's about your work ethic and reputation because both those things provide longevity. Your network gets you into a room, but your credibility keeps you there. I want you to hold on to that idea. And then lastly, this was a quote that I had heard all the time. I couldn't figure out who actually said it, but the quote went, "It's not what you know, but it's who you know." And it's funny because, you know, we live in a world where nepotism is alive and well. And a lot of times, no matter how hard you try to get some doors open, it's not about what you know. It's about who you know, who's on the other side of that door. So again, networking, it's so important. And now one of my favorite things to do is to try to summarize this whole episode into a single phrase, an episode in a phrase. So our episode in a phrase this week is your credit score matters. You know, I purposely tried to restrain from as many credit score jokes as I possibly could. But if there's one thing I want you to take away from this is build a credit score. And not the type with just credit cards, but a credit score among your network, among your peers, among your organization, because it will project you into the career and into the life that you want. So, all right. So without any further ado, let's jump into sticky thoughts that stick. So 1, credibility is the trust and endorsement of others. 2, never say no. 3, pass the buck. And last but certainly not least, 4, your credit score matters because your network opens the door and your work ethic and reputation keep you in the room. So thank you so much for hanging out with me and talking all things about building credit, or should I say building credibility. So I'd love to connect with you more. You can connect with us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Let's Unravel Pod. If you enjoyed this week's episode of the podcast show in general, please leave a review on Apple Podcast or Spotify. Your comments and 5-star ratings go a very long way. Also, please don't forget to hit that follow button or subscribe button wherever you might listen to stay up to date on all new episodes. We have new episodes coming out every single Thursday, and you're not going to want to miss a thing. Well, I guess it's that time of the episode to tell you my hot take. Do I think onions belong on salads? I'm going to be honest. I don't think they belong on salads. I have never ate a salad and thought, ooh, I could really go for some onions on this. It's just not my favorite. I will make an exception for a Southwest salad, and if there's onions in the pico, that's a little different. But for the most part, I've never thought that onions have added any value to my salads. That's just my personal opinion. Drop your thoughts in the comments down below, and I will see you guys next week with another new episode. I'll talk to you later. Bye.